You have to love the process. To get really good at something, you got to suck at it for a while and get better and suck at it again and get better and so on and so forth. If you only love the outcome, it's just too hard. Control the controllables and fall in love with the process and surrender and be okay with whatever the outcome ends up being. That is what will lead to contentment and profound happiness, to give your very best in every element of your life. That is the ultimate safeguard against regret. And regret, that's the thing everybody should try and avoid. That's cancerous and that erodes so many good things in your life if you have regret.
Welcome to another episode of Success with Purpose, where we help mentor you into becoming a more successful version of yourself. We do this through giving you access to mentors you typically would never have the opportunity to connect with. We explore their journeys, their experiences, their life-changing events, their fields of expertise, and most importantly, their purpose. My name is Harry Goldberg, husband to an incredible woman, father of 2 amazing daughters, host, interviewer and interrogator of this podcast. And now, just before we learn from yet another exceptional guest, if you find value from these conversations, please make sure to like and subscribe below, leave a review. It really does make a difference. And of course, share it with someone else who's going to find value. Now, listen in, pay attention, take some notes, enjoy. Let's begin. Nick Langton, welcome.
Harry, how are you?
Yeah, doing well today. All right, so for the listeners, Nick, your career has until recently been more so focused on kind of like the corporate world, financial services, financial advice, wealth management, asset management, those types of roles. And it all seemed to start changing in 2013 when you co-founded Wim to Warrior. 2016, you co-founded Alta, which is an exceptional business, which at the time of this recording, soon to hit the global stage. And we'll get the chance to explore Alta in this conversation too.
I look forward to that.
And so aside from being both corporate executive and entrepreneur, you're also a husband, a father, and an all-around passionate individual.
I am.
So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise.
All right, so before we dive into your journey, how do you define success?
Yeah, I've thought about this question a lot. It's a great question. I think how I define success now has actually got a lot more to do with how I define success now that I'm raising 3 boys, 3 young men now. I've got 2 17-year-olds and a 15-year-old. And I think what I internally defined as success versus how I probably talk to them about it has probably changed a bit. So I think the best definition is success is actually a function of getting the most out of the attributes and opportunities you've been given. So in that regard, I think success is quite relative to those elements. And I think it's more helpful for individuals to think about success. Like, it's not helpful for an entrepreneur who's starting out to use their immediate benchmark being Amazon and Jeff Bezos, because ultimately they're always going to look terrible in comparison to that. Maybe not forever. Maybe they are one of those exceptional entrepreneurs. They build something that's substantial as Amazon. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make there, I think that it's very helpful at every life stage to look at success through a prism of how you're performing relative to your potential, and your opportunities. And I think that allows people to be a bit more thoughtful and in the moment about what they can do tomorrow to make tomorrow successful and therefore make the next day successful. So I think about that in that lens. And then probably the other lens is more holistically, Harry, and that is that oftentimes we talk, as I've just done now, talked about success in the prism of economic reward, building, growth, financial, when in fact, I think when you talk to most people, and certainly some of the most successful investors who have invested in my business and, fantastic people that I've learned a lot from, they'll often talk about how, they're judging their success now through their impact on their family, their relationships, their children, their grandchildren, what they're hoping to achieve through philanthropy, how they're going to impact their corner of the world. And so I think then that additional definition of success means that I think you should, as a whole human, try and look at it through multiple lenses so that you do have, balance in your life. It's a bit of a long answer, but I think it sort of warrants pondering because it's not an easy thing to define.
No, it's definitely not. But if I try and feedback what I've heard from you, the core of it is saying assess what you're actually able to achieve, like what you're genuinely capable of achieving, given the opportunities and the resources and perhaps personality and that kind of stuff as well, and assess that, well, I'm starting here. Where's the furthest I can get to that I can realistically get to?
Yeah.
And if you get that far, if you get to the furthest that you can get to, then you start to go, okay, well, I've actually, like, now I've been successful in doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not necessarily like you need to be the best father in the world, but if you ended up being raised by a father who was subpar, let's say, and let's say they're alcoholic and abusive and whatever, right? Like the worst you're going to go, not present, gambling all the money away, and you end up just being not harmful to your kids. Is that success?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's some absolute measures where you would hope people would strive for, I don't think it's necessarily a case of if I'm just a little bit better than the last day or something. In a relative sense, yes, it is success. In an absolute sense, it's probably still not, success. But what I'm trying to encapsulate around success is I think, people always talk about comparison is the thief of joy. And I think, in life, as you get older, you start to certainly, ideally, or hopefully, you care less about what people think. You care less about, what you have versus somebody else, and you start thinking about impact. And in that regard, I think it's helpful to look at success again through a lens of, have I squeezed the most out of myself? When it comes to my talents, abilities, and potential, can I look in the mirror and say, you know what, I've had a crack? And that's why I find that's a helpful lens to define success. Because if I sit down and with my three boys, well, what am I talking about success in a year for them? It might be, did you make the sports teams that you were training hard and competing to get in, your rugby team, your basketball team, whatever? Did you perform academically above what you were hoping to achieve? Did you make some positive steps in the little business that you have been building? Have you saved money towards some holidays and other things that you've set as goals? You could then, in a relative sense, it's very easy to sit down and then say, well, that's been a very successful year, and that's a helpful benchmark. Whereas, for a 15-year-old or 17-year-old kid, did you build the next big thing company, or did you do something truly extraordinary? I'm not sure that's entirely helpful over that time frame at that age or given that opportunity set. So, yeah, I suppose that's how I'm trying to classify success in a relative sense.
Right. And so as you share that, right, you're talking about absolute versus relative, and I'm asking you more questions because I'm trying to distinguish, or at least identify, kind of where's that barrier, because it doesn't seem like something is absolute or relative. It's some sort of scale. And like when you're talking about helping one of your boys with getting into the basketball team, for example, there's one benchmark of success that you get into the basketball team.
Yep.
And that's your goal. Great, you get into the basketball team. If that's the goal, if that's what you're striving towards, and that's what you've achieved, then maybe you're successful, right?
Yep.
There's another being being the best in the basketball team.
Yep.
Then there's another considering if you were the worst in the basketball team last year, can you get, like, what's the best that you could strive for this year?
Yeah.
And is that mean that you're like in the top 5 of the basketball players or whatever, top drafts, that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Where do you start drawing the line to, like, where the comparison is helpful?
Yeah.
Because it's like your performance is ultimately, like, especially something like basketball, but almost everything, even career, your performance is relative to others.
Yep.
But you don't want the comparison to be the thief of your joy.
Yeah, it's a good point, and that's why it's not a precise science. So if I think about it, with my boys who've all trained and tried to achieve certain things in just a junior sporting career that they take relatively seriously. So my twins with their basketball, my youngest son with his rugby, they've had successes where they've made teams, so that's a very objective measure of success. They've made that team. They've been selected in the starting 5 in that team, whatever. And they've had instances where they've been dropped for their performances or something like that. So that's what do they say, Harry? That's an exposure mechanism, right? And that's, but then there's been other times when, like, I've watched them play and, for example, they haven't won a game, but I've been much more proud of their performance and effort than other games where maybe they scored more points, but I just didn't see, maybe they scored more points against opposition that wasn't as good. And maybe this time they played way beyond themselves in a really hard game. They didn't score quite as many, but what you can't trick your heart. So I've sat in the car driving home with them after some performances where, let's say, on the scoreboard they lost, but relative to their capabilities, their courage, everything like that, they absolutely won. And the truest measure for that is when I ask them, genuinely, how do you feel? And you can tell, even if they don't always articulate it exactly as you and I might think, what it gets down to is they're deeply proud. They're deeply proud of themselves. And if they're deeply proud of themselves, that means they've got no doubt. They didn't feel they left anything on the table. They gave everything. And that's why I suppose that's then a more subjective measure of success. And we have it in business, right? There's some times when we've worked incredibly hard for something, not quite got there, but feel really okay about the result because we know we did everything we could. And I suppose if I'm forced, as much as the objective measures are the things people can externally recognize and see, and that's obvious, I think the thing that leads to the greatest amount of contentment and happiness is actually satisfying your own internal subjective barometer, because you can't lie to yourself, right? So maybe that's where I land on that one. Maybe ultimately your own internal subjective opinion, did you really do everything possible? And are you completely at peace with the result regardless? I think that's nirvana when it comes to success.
Okay, so that's a really potent topic to explore, because most people I've found do tend to lie to themselves, right? And all my coaching experience and even my experiences as a financial advisor in the past and all that kind of stuff, I've found that people definitely do lie to themselves. But it seems as though for yourself, you've found that there's this way to catch yourself when you're lying to yourself, to catch yourself on how to actually be true to yourself. Because, I mean, it's very easy. Like, people usually want to avoid pain. That's usually the source of most people's pain. Ultimately, is they're trying to avoid it.
Yeah.
And so what they do in order to try and avoid it is they say, well, I guess I didn't do that bad. Like, no, it's okay. I tried my best. And if they start believing they tried their best and continue to repeat that to themselves, even when they haven't, they'll start to believe the lie that they continue to repeat to themselves.
Yeah.
So how do you, especially if you're living in line with kind of just being like asking yourself the question and being honest with yourself, being true to yourself, how do you make sure that there's that honesty inside? Or how have you found it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can't speak for others. I think that, I suppose, something innate in me, which is a blessing and a curse, is that I don't find it hard to be incredibly honest about whether I feel I've done well or otherwise. So if anything, I've probably had a very I've often said, you know, I I think sometimes I've spoken to myself in my internal monologue in a manner in which I'd never speak to a friend or someone I was counselling or advising, in terms of just how blunt and rude and harsh. And, I think a lot of people suffer from that too. And so but the beauty of that is that I think I've been I haven't found it hard to be honest with myself about where I feel I've performed or otherwise, whether it's as as a family man, whether it's commercially, whether it's in my friendships. I've never found it that hard to be, objective about that. And look, maybe I did find it harder many, many years ago and I just can't remember it. But I certainly know for the last decade, and I think this comes with age and presumably a little bit of wisdom, that you realize you're wasting time if you're deluding yourself on those things. And of course, I'm 49 now. I turn 50 this year. It's probably a reasonable assumption to say there's more sand in the bottom of the hourglass than in the top. So I often say I'm not operating in the money or financial economy anymore. I'm operating in the time economy. And so my most precious asset is time. So wasting time, deluding myself, not being honest with myself, not being honest with my loved ones, that, would seem a terrible thing to do at this stage. So that's what centers me in that kind of stark honesty, I suppose.
Okay, and it seems like an important point to note from what you just said there. We're talking about people being honest with them, not being honest with themselves, by kind of being too easy on themselves, right? Like giving them excuses or giving themselves excuses, easy way outs, whatever. But now you're saying also don't be too hard on yourself. Right? And you've said that costs you time ultimately, but I'm guessing it costs you performance or success in other areas as well, right? Like if you end up, I don't know, we can keep going back to basketball now, it can be whatever, right? It can be at work or you stuff up a deal or whatever, and you go, damn it, you idiot, you're stupid, how could you have done that? Like, you got to get better, whatever, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. That's not helpful either.
No.
So
I think I've thought about, I think a lot of the advice I give now comes from the lens of being a dad and raising, 3 boys who are now young men now. And, as I say, my twins recently got their P plates. So they're now, it's the weirdest thing to see your 3 kids get in a car together with no parent and drive off out of the driveway. You have a moment to think that's my entire world in that car together now on the road. It doesn't feel that long ago, though, I was clipping them into baby seats. So the reason, from my perspective, what sharpens it is that when I think about how you'd give advice to a friend, a loved one who came to you in need, and particularly how you'd give advice to your kids, which, with your kids, you're not going to shortchange them on honesty to save their feelings if you really love them, right? Because presumably if they feel safe enough, you can tell them what you need to tell them, and you can tell them from an environment of high support. But you also don't have to sugarcoat that maybe they came up short in that regard, and you're telling them, I'm telling you the truth because I love you, right? Like that's an easy conversation to have. I think it would be helpful, and I try and do this somewhat. I think it would be helpful if the way we spoke to our friends, ourselves internally, if we were speaking with that same degree of honesty, transparency, and respect we show our kids, because they're the most precious things in the world. If you could, if I could speak to myself the way I would, I would never, in my harsher moments when I've been angry at myself about something, my internal monologue might be really quite aggressive and self-admonishing. Yet I would never speak to one of my boys like that, because I know that'd be completely counterproductive.
Right. So you're unique as a dad in that sense. Not unique, as in, unfortunately, I see a lot of parents struggle to manage their emotions, and they do speak to their kids the way they speak to themselves, as opposed to speaking to their kids the way they wish they spoke to themselves. And you found a way to differentiate between those two.
Yeah.
Is it just because you just value your kids and you love them so much, or is it because you've done other elements of personal development and kind of like work on yourself, or is there something else? Because that you said that as a blanket rule, like for everyone who loves their kids. I agree with you. I've been very proud of myself being able to act that way.
Yeah.
But I've had a lot of dads share with me, and mums as well, that they're not capable of doing it in the same way.
Yeah.
They wish they could.
I mean, look, I still have the crazy dad moments where I'll yell out at them for something that's, someone's broken something, or, something silly's happened after we've said, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. But I'm talking about where I characterize it as being where I don't make the mistake is if it's actually really important life advice, or it's something that we're really got to talk about because I think it's intrinsically valuable to their personal development. I'm very conscious of the gravity of that conversation, and I want to make sure that conversation is not rushed and it's not done in a way that's too emotionally charged, and that we can that they feel safe participating in the conversation. They're not just being a good sign for parents. If your kids are sitting there and entirely passive in a conversation, just listening to you, it might be either they're bored or disengaged, or they're scared, and they just want this moment to end. So I think that I'm very deliberate about saying, I check back I said, is what I've said, does that make sense? If it doesn't, help me understand. I do ask open questions at the end to say, do you understand what I'm saying there, or have I explained that well enough? Could I, I do make sure I sort of check in on that. And so, so I mean, every parent goes through their moments where they can give you, I can come downstairs and, after being at work all day, and let's say the boys have been on school holidays, you come home and the kitchen's a mess. I'm not going to say I want to sit down and have a really careful, gentle conversation about why they should think about their mum and I. I might just yell out, guys, this is a joke. Come on. And they'll come back, go, yeah, and they'll clean it up. So, but for any conversation that I think has a lot of gravity for their development, I'm very conscious of that. And I think I'm conscious of that because I've done some self-development myself. I've worked with, professionals to help better understand, my mind, how I approach life, how I think about life. Read a bunch of books, listened to a bunch of people, understand that I'm a work in progress till the day I die, and being very comfortable with the fact that I'm a work in progress until then.
Okay. And so if we loop that back to your definition of success, which is basically it's always going to be relative to the opportunities and the position that you start in, right? Like you can't expect yourself to be beating Usain Bolt on the 100-meter race.
Yeah.
And you definitely, you probably can't even expect that if you're the average person, even if you're starting at the 70-meter line, like with only 30 meters left to go, it's probably still going to beat you as that fast. And so there's less of the comparison with others, but more inside yourself. Have you actually given it your all?
Yeah.
That's the question you're asking?
Yeah, it is. What I do believe, though, is that you're right. There's certain people, if they wanted to dive in the pool and beat Michael Phelps, it doesn't matter how much they train, it's never going to happen. Like your Usain Bolt argument. As much as my boys adore basketball and train, are they going to have a career in the NBA that replicates LeBron James? No, they're not. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is I don't want people to shrink from the opportunity or the possibility of success, and they should think and dream wildly about what they could achieve, but understand that might happen over multiple decades. And what's a more helpful measure day to day is if you're getting the most out of yourself day to day, or even if you're not 100% optimizing your talent and potential every day, but if you're coming up on the positive side of the ledger every day, you're just doing that a little bit better, and you genuinely can say, looking yourself in the mirror, say, I had a pretty good day today, right? I'm trying hard here. I think that's a very good, helpful, regular definition of success. But I don't want that to be interpreted as, I think, God, any number of people listening to this or kids out there, I think they should be limitless in what they think they can achieve, so long as they're prepared to allow a big enough time frame to achieve it.
Right. You've spoken about time a lot. I haven't heard you reference energy, or not directly. Are you able to share what you mean by the time frame that you need, but then also like this, like to give it at your all, it kind of sounds like it also needs a lot of energy behind it.
Yeah. I think time frames, I would classify myself as an impatient person. I think I've been impatient. I think that's been a contributor to, seeking the next set of goals and achieving, whether it's in career or life or other endeavors. I think a certain degree of impatience and wanting to strive, I think that's sort of helpful. But where impatience is not, like, for example, I'm now in year 7 of building a business that we're in a process of going down a path to listing in the US later this year, and then we'll get an opportunity to raise a lot of capital and grow a lot further and faster. But that, if that's 7 years of incredible graft and grind. If you'd told me on day one it would take this long to get to here and I'd have to go through all of that, I'm not 100% sure I would have done it, because it's been that long and hard. So that's where impatience can be great in terms of that kind of, so long as impatience is more to do with your daily or weekly cadence of getting enough done. But if impatience then is unrealistic in that I want to do in 2 years what really will take 5 or 6, well then impatience is not helpful. So I'm not sure I'm defining it clearly.
So if you had that knowledge, right? If you had that hindsight, let's just say you had 20/20 vision, right? And you had that hindsight, like, this is going to take 7 years of grind in order to get these particular results, and you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm too impatient for that. Wouldn't you have, like, that would have limited your success, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so should you have worked on your own definition of how much impatience or whatever that you're willing to accept? Or would you have tried to, like, kind of fool yourself and go, no, you know what, it's saying that it's going to take that long. I'm just going to do it as fast as I can and hope it's going to be faster. Like, what would be your approach?
Well, I suppose my approach is what it was, which is the more accepting you are of the journey as its own reward, I think that is enormously helpful, versus thinking about, like, there's certain milestones you want to achieve in business and you have to track certain performance indicators, whether it's revenue, number of customers, all those kinds of things. Yes, of course. And then there's some things that you have to rely on the fact that the right outcome will reveal itself in the fullness of time, provided you're still putting your best foot forward every day. So I think there's some things that are very helpful to measure. And then there's other things that are more arbitrary, like, when will we hit a valuation of X? When will I close a funding round of X? When will, we go from being a private company to publicly listed and exchange traded? I think you can have goals about when you would like that to be, but if you get too rigid about that, you're going to create, I suppose, challenges in the kind of the natural pathway of getting there. So I think the thing I've learnt undoubtedly in the last 7 years around patience, and I'm talking in the context of business building, but it flows into other areas of my life, Harry, is that you have to love the process. If you only love the outcome, it's just too hard. And I didn't always love the process, and that's what I've gotten a lot better at. And loving if you derive utility from sticking to the process and just working through it and being okay that whatever will be, then that allows you to, I suppose, kind of live where you're not just constantly worried about this existential threat and, as all startup businesses kind of have hanging over them the whole time. So I think the quicker people can fall in love with a process as opposed to an outcome. And it sounds cliched and hardcore because we hear sports stars talk about it all the time. and it is actually one of the great truisms that if you control the controllables, right? And if you can control the controllables and fall in love with the process and surrender and be okay with whatever the outcome ends up being, that will definitely allow you to perform at your best and be happier day to day. And that wasn't an epiphany for me. That was learned the hard way over a long period of time.
Okay, well, let's explore that journey, and let's especially learn where throughout your journey you started realizing, I got to trust the process. Okay, I've got to fall in love with whatever the outcome is.
Yeah.
I've just got to put my all into it.
Yeah.
Maybe give the listeners some background. What was your upbringing like? Like where did you start out, and then and then kind of take it away with career from there?
Yeah, so I was born on the northern beaches of Sydney, to great parents, loving parents. I've got a younger sister. We spent a couple of years living in London when I was really young. Mum and Dad were both teachers, and so they were teaching over there. And there was a deal set up where it was quite financially lucrative for Australian teachers to go to London for a period of time and do that. So we lived overseas for a bit. I have very, very sort of vague memories of it, although Mum and Dad often told me the story that I came home with a full a little Cockney Pommy accent, which was, which obviously I don't have it all now, but that was,
No.
that was sort of, and then I grew up on Sydney's northern beaches. I grew up in a loving family, stable environment, parents who, they'd both been the first of their family to be tertiary educated. So, and they'd also moved from living in the inner city and the inner west of Sydney to deciding to live up at, Newport Beach, where I still live today. And yeah, I think I had a pretty, normal childhood, parents who were, in love and had a great marriage, and they were good, supportive parents, loving parents, encouraging of me to, pursue whatever I wanted to pursue. They certainly embedded in us some, principles around, travel. There's a big world out there, and to, embrace discovery and, be curious about other cultures, travel widely. Don't think this little corner of the world, but that shouldn't be your only lens. So I think in that regards, I was encouraged to be, pretty open and a little bit more worldly. And I was encouraged to study, to go to university and then, pursue a career, which I did. So I finished high school. I just went to the local state high school up here at North Avalon at Barrenjoey High. And then I went to Sydney University and studied economics. And in 1996, I landed at a company called Bankers Trust, and started in there as a kind of a fresh uni grad. And yeah, that was certainly a formative part of my development. I feel very fortunate to have started my career where I did. So, I didn't come from big connections, networks, expensive schools, anything like that, but I built a lot of that in my years at Bankers Trust.
Why Bankers Trust? Like why that environment? Why was that environment and forming those connections so helpful? And how did that environment allow you to really form those connections compared to somewhere else?
Yeah, well, for starters, I went in there as the classic, Gen X. In late 1996, I started there. Met some fantastic people, a lot of really bright people, a young, vibrant culture, working on the asset management side, really understanding, certainly in the early days of asset management, the customer service element, the advisor service element, how that whole distribution network worked. And it just felt like BT back in the day was a real powerhouse in the sort of the mid-90s. A lot of the most famous asset managers Australia's produced came out of BT, and I just kind of felt fortunate to be a young kid around a lot of really smart people who encouraged you to. It was actually, I think it was a wonderful meritocracy. You got in there, you did well, you worked hard, you got results, you got promoted, and I got promoted a bunch of times. So I applied for jobs internally, got promoted, and I had people who believed in me and backed me when I was still, pretty wet behind the ears, but they obviously saw something in me, and so I felt like I belonged, and I still to this day very proud of starting there. I've still got a bunch of friendships like that I talk to every week. A bunch of investors on my cap table are people I started working with back in the mid-90s at Bankers Trust. So yeah, it was in the absence of having that earlier, like not going to a big private school or not having those natural professional connections, I think that was the start of that for me in an environment that it might have suited a bunch of other people I don't know, but I found it a wonderful meritocracy and I loved it.
And it sounds like there's this element of you having built up great relationships with a lot of the key decision makers, but people ahead of you, mentors. Did that kind of just happen naturally, or did you have to work at building up those relationships?
I was very conscious of trying to learn from people that were older and smarter than me. So I've always been a pretty curious person, and I think that's helped. And I found that the people, in my time at BT, a lot of the people I reported to, or people that were several levels above me, was pretty egalitarian too. Like there was no one you couldn't go up and talk to, and I didn't necessarily feel, that I shouldn't speak to somebody. So if there was an opportunity to ask somebody a question to learn something, I'd certainly do it. And I think culturally it was a pretty great shop. So, I just was curious. When I saw people who were older than me, wiser than me, who were really good at their jobs, I looked to learn from them. And I think what happened is that I think, Harry, that some of them then thought, well, he's a bright enough young guy and he's clearly driven and he's prepared to work hard. So those people then gave me time. And so then it's not as though you're out there you try to ingratiate yourself and build a network because it's all about what can I get out of this. So I think it was more just if you were curious, hardworking and prepared to take opportunities, there was, I can't think of a better place to work, quite frankly. So I feel really lucky. I just fell into that environment in the mid-1990s when I landed there.
Right. So this is where you started to learn how to kind of work hard and take advantage of opportunities. And it sounds like with a bit of pace of promotion and like the cadence of growth and the people you're around, you probably also started to develop a bit of your own patience as well, at least in the corporate setting.
Yeah, I think that you certainly, promotions were nice if they meant more responsibility and more opportunity to learn and grow. And obviously if there was better compensation attached to that, wonderful too. And then I think, you probably go through, this is some kind of characterizing sort of my early 20s through to my sort of mid to late 20s. Yeah, you certainly, maybe it was then I started to shape up the idea of, well, what does a successful career look like? And now that would have been those really objective measures of can you get to this level and earn X and run a business of this size or something like that. I think that's when I probably first started thinking about those things, because you'd look at people internally within the business and you might think, well, they're really smart and I like them and they run great businesses. That's something I might want to emulate. So I think that's where you start, certainly where I started to shape my view of, well, what do I want to do? Well, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but that looks pretty good. They look like they got a pretty good job and they got a pretty good life. I like that person. Yeah, why not? Not sort of copy it, but emulate it.
Right. And I think a lot of people, they struggle with that primarily because most corporate environments aren't exactly like that anymore.
Yeah.
Like you'll find some kind of like boutique firms and, maybe up to 50 employees or whatever it is, where you get that kind of vibe or that kind of environment. But most of the time you're limited in terms of who you can actually connect with and reach out to,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But then the other part as well is that then you see the people who are right at the top. You see the people who are successful in their career, and
Yeah.
they don't necessarily have great lives. There's a reason that they're back at Friday night drinks all the time
Yeah.
instead of being at home with their family. And so it could become quite challenging to find the right role models in most areas. So that sounds like a real gift that you had where
Yeah.
you were at the
Well, I
time.
mean, I think when you're young too, you probably don't know enough about life to really be making value judgments on whether that person, like you kind of take it for what you see it as. So as you get older, of course, you realize that there's way more complexity that comes with those big roles and those big responsibilities. And there's a lot more juggle. And, as I've been raised with a family for the last 17 years, I've got a lot more appreciation of now what that was like. But as a young kid, you don't have any view on that. You just go, there's a bunch of really smart people here and I can learn from them. And enough of them seem to like me to give me some opportunities. And I was I mean, again, classic Gen X. I've always felt very grateful for opportunities, and I don't want to get into the culture wars between the generations because I know they're very different. And but I will say feel I feel life was a bit simpler then. I feel that certainly when I started my career, I worked in environments where there was probably pretty rigorous appraisal, of your performance in sort of very stark exposure mechanisms, and and perhaps your performance appraisal, could happen on the run in front of a whole bunch of people at work, and you kind of just had to have tough enough skin around that too. And so, in that regard, I think things were a little less complicated. But at the same time, maybe just because it didn't bother me, maybe it bothered a bunch of other people. I don't know. But I enjoyed. I was talking to one of my investors the other night, who was one of my first bosses in 1998, and he's a great guy, but he was a real hard ass. He yelled at me a lot. But now that with distance, he was under a massive amount of pressure. He had a young family. He was building this business inside BT, and he's a really good man. And I've stayed in touch with him ever since. And then he's been an investor backing me in my current endeavor. But yeah, I laughed at him. Like you couldn't speak to someone in the workplace the way he probably spoke to me back then. But I don't know. I never got offended because I always knew that deep down he's a really good guy. That was his way of driving performance. So I didn't take it personally.
Right, and that's a very powerful point, because a lot of people will take criticisms from their manager personally.
Yeah.
Probably even back with your generation, back in your day, the majority of people who you started out with didn't climb the rungs. Like if we're talking about objective success, they didn't climb the rungs as well. They even more subjective. That maybe they haven't had as beautiful families or have been involved with their kids or feel capable of doing it, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something about it, like most people today, at least, even if you look at millennials, let alone Gen Z, which I haven't particularly dived into too closely. But if you look at millennials, they'll be like, well, that was a terrible boss, horrific boss.
Yeah.
They didn't I kind of did well under them, but they just weren't a nice energy to be around, so I'm just going to avoid them.
Yeah.
Whereas you decided to keep in touch with them. Did you get more advice with him along the way as well? Like, did he continue to, did you touch base throughout that whole journey, or was it was your boss in 98 for a couple of years or whatever it was, and then you touched base with him again in the late 2010s or in 2020?
I ended up going and working for him again between 2002 and 2007 kind of thing. So and even by then, as a leader and whatever, that he'd moderated, he'd gotten older and wiser himself, and so yeah, I kind of think, I had a bunch of people around, who I worked, not just him, but that was a really obvious example because he was very robust in how he'd kind of talk about things and give directions and pretty blunt, really wouldn't sugarcoat much at all. There's a whole bunch of other people that I worked with in that environment. I do feel, and maybe some people listen to this and think, well, you're sounding like a bit of a dinosaur here, but I feel my development was accelerated because people weren't walking on eggshells the whole time, and you probably were getting helpful performance appraisal more clearly, and maybe I just processed it in a healthier way. Maybe some people it really does, hurt them, and so yeah, that's why again my view on it is very subjective, but I do think broadly, Harry, that if people can, be open to subjecting themselves to a bit more rigor in terms of appraisal in performance, particularly in career and the workplace, and if they can really try and make it not personal and just understand it's about advice and getting you better, even if it's not delivered perfectly, I think that's a helpful mindset. I think that's a healthier, happier mindset than if things aren't said exactly as I need, because I find that triggering. I just don't think that's a helpful or productive mindset. That's just my view. It's just my view.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I mean, part of the reason for this podcast being here is because people don't know how to reach out to mentors. They don't know how to get the advice. They're always worried that the person, like once they reveal themselves, the person's going to say something that's going to hurt them, right? It's the human nature, ultimately, to be fearful of that. So part of this is that people can now hear that advice. They're not feeling attacked because, well, it's not specifically talking about them. You don't even know who's listening to this. But at the same time, they can start to question themselves. Okay, well, maybe I'm being too easy on myself. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself. Maybe I should kind of just toughen up and put in more energy or put in more effort. Like that type of thing. They can now hear it. They can try and adopt it for themselves. Like, maybe I have been lying to myself and I should be more honest. And so that's part of the reason, by the way, for everyone listening, I really emphasize getting mentors. Nick, you've already spoken about a couple of them and we're going to keep exploring more. But just being able to find the mentors that are just going to be straight shooters with you. They're going to tell you what they actually think about you, about your actions, and you're going to know that they have all well intentions. And if you believe that, then there's going to be truth in what they have to share as well. So there's value in that.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
What was next for you? So you were at BT for a while?
Yeah, I was at BT for a while. My wife and I got married. She was working at BZW, which became ABN AMRO. So we both worked in financial services or financial markets. And then we had 12 months off after we got married to travel, because we were going to originally travel straight after uni, and then we kind of got good jobs and then wasn't sure what the travel timeline would be, and it ended up kind of, 5 years later, we ended up doing it after we got married. So we did take 12 months off. We traveled probably Europe for 9 months. Hired a car and just literally drove everywhere, put 25,000 Ks on that thing in 9 months. And then we came back. We were back home in Australia for 3 weeks, whole bunch of weddings and different things with friends. And then we went off to Canada for a ski season, and that was a little bit truncated because I had a big accident and had to come home early for surgery. But we kind of had a full 12-month break out of our careers, and that was cherished kind of time. That was pretty amazing.
This early 2000s?
Yeah, we flew out March 01, and we were kind of back April 02.
What did you learn from that time off? Because most people would be like, that's impossible to take that much time. No way you can take that much time off your
of your career and your growth. What were some of the challenges that you were facing to try and make that decision? And then how did you end up deciding? And then what are some of the learnings that you got from it?
Yeah. Look, I think we started with a view that we would probably do some kind of working holiday as well. So we went and got all the right work visas for London. So if we wanted to spend some time living in London and apply for, we didn't want to do kind of basic jobs in London. We thought if we're going to go and work there, we may as well, get back into financial services. So that was a kind of a part plan, maybe some optionality there. We wanted to actually have a bit of a holiday first. Spent a bunch of time. I think we spent the first 6 weeks of the holiday in Turkey. We started in Istanbul and then kind of went way east and then worked our way south and then back down the coast. We were back in Çanakkale for the Anzac Day dawn service at Gallipoli for Anzac Day 2001. That was something we'd always wanted to do. That was incredible experience. To any Australian, I can't recommend enough spending an Anzac Day overseas, whether it's in northern France or Gallipoli, where some of our the most powerful stories of Australia and our armed forces and their bravery was evident, and just the bond between the Turkish people and the Australians. I think so. That was definitely something that was always forming part of the. So I think, what I learned there, I had that moment where you kind of overcome with sort of emotion that you are old enough to realise, my God, these were kids a lot younger than me who were dying in these trenches here, and how many years ago was this, right? So I suppose there was that sort of kind of maturing gratitude and wanting to visit some of those sites that were important to a young Australian to help understand our place in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think as well, like even when we started the trip, it was very much, we had a whole bunch of things we wanted to get to. So we were still working on quite a timetable, our travel timetable. And then there was probably a point in the trip, maybe 2 months in, 2.5 months in, when it was the first time that now we'd got through everything in the first 2.5 months of the travel agenda, every event we wanted to go to, every town we'd wanted to be at a certain date, whatever. And that was the first time we kind of breathed and sort of thought, okay, so what do we do with the next, 5.5 months or whatever the case may be? And that was probably the first moment about, this is actually a big career break. And, having been recently married, just starting to talk about, what do we think the next phase of our life looks like? It's still a while away. We're going to travel for a fair bit, but it was it was the most incredible break. And I think I'm biased again. I think it was a lot better than if we'd done it straight out of uni and we were on the bones of our ass, and like we could afford a bit better stuff. Like we could afford the 2-star pension instead of the group hostel. We could afford the odd B&B. We had for 6 of the 9 months around Europe, we had our own, brand new Renault through that whole Renault Eurodrive scheme. So we had complete freedom because we had this fantastic new car that we could just drive around everywhere. And so I definitely think my backpacker experience was a lot better because we were a bit older and we had a bit more money and just maybe a little bit more purpose.
Before kids, right?
Yep. Yeah, well before kids.
Yeah. And so you got back, and then you ended up, you'd had all these conversations about what you're going to do with your career and where you're going to be focused.
Yep.
Was there a clear shift for you, or did you decide to continue to be focused in the same direction?
No, continue to be focused in the same direction. So kind of came back and tapped into my network and got an opportunity at a new company, got a great opportunity again working in kind of asset management and platform sales, which, that's where I'd sort of been. And that's when I first started working around wealth advisory and financial advice and those elements. So it was more kind of come back and I've kind of picked up where I left off. And now I've got a great growth path in a new company. And similarly, my wife came back, she had a job with a great boutique investment bank and then sort of started her career towards portfolio management. So we both kind of came back and I suppose kind of picked up where we left off and kept that sort of trajectory going. And then that was the phase of life, Harry, that's more sort of, okay, now we're buying a house, we're thinking about starting a family, that kind of thing.
Oh. And it was, a few years of that before your twins were born?
Yeah, so we kind of got back and started working properly again full-time in sort of, call it April 2002. And then, the twins were born in May of 2006. And in that time, we'd come back, we'd bought an old beach shack in Newport. We developed plans to build on the site. We'd knocked it down and we did a rebuild and we'd moved into our house. So there was that phase, sort of 4 years, was kind of setting up the house where we're going to live, where we're going to raise a family, and then, kicked off with twins to start with.
And then you had the kids. How did that change you?
It definitely changed. It did. It initially changed my focus around, more work-life balance and being home more, and particularly with twins. That's, there is more work than just your first kid, and so it's important to be a hands-on dad, and I certainly was that. So I think that was something that I was focused on, and we had our third not long after. So we had a young family, and my wife didn't want to go back to work full time because she wanted to focus on raising the boys. She was able to start her own business, maths tutoring, and actually build an amazing business there, which she loved for a lot of years. So the responsibility on me to go back out and obviously, be a breadwinner and a provider, which I was conscious of. But I think I definitely was conscious that, perhaps if I could avoid an extra night away from home interstate, or I could drive home from that client dinner and be up early the next morning rather than staying out late or whatever. I think, those are the sorts of, life-based decisions you start making with a young family. And that felt pretty natural and easy because, they're good kids and I enjoy being around them.
Okay. And what was your next role after that? Where did it progress to?
Yeah, so I spent some time in, in financial advice. I spent some time back in asset management and insurance. Then I went to private wealth, and I was running private wealth at Perpetual, which was a wonderful company to work for. Spent quite some time there and learnt, a lot, again, working back with some, really smart people in a really great business. Really enjoyed that period of my career. But I was, really fortunate. Perpetual sent me, Harry, to study overseas at Harvard Business School. I did the advanced management program, so I went and lived on campus for a couple of months, and that was the next catalyst for me thinking, well, hang on, I want something more out of life. And I suppose if you ask me the origins of why I've ended up becoming, an entrepreneur and a business builder, I'd say they were rooted in a couple of things that happened while I was studying at HBS.
Okay. So you were studying at Harvard Business School, and you said there are a couple of things that started tweaking for you. Like, let's get out of corporate and start going to entrepreneur. And in this conversation, I'd like to preframe it that entrepreneurialism can have varied definitions, right?
Yeah.
People can be entrepreneurial by setting up their own business. People can be entrepreneurial by focusing on growing their career and making sure that their income is more tied to their performance rather than just tied to the hours that they work.
Yeah.
People or can try and get some ownership in the company they're in. People can be entrepreneurial by taking their assets and being more active with how they invest it. There are so many ways to be entrepreneurial. But I'm getting the sense in this context, you're talking about getting out of the executive leadership type roles in a big company or a big organization.
Yep.
And going and starting something as a smaller team, or just you with someone else, and building it up from the ground, right?
Yep, that's accurate. That's exactly how I'm kind of framing it.
Right. And what were the things that happened while you were at Harvard that started planting those seeds?
Yep. So a couple of things. The most stark one, I've talked about it, quite a bit, but for those who haven't heard the story, with some friends we had over there. Obviously, I was living on campus in business school, and they were living just down in Back Bay in Boston. And anyway, so Tanya and my boys were on the finish line the day of the Boston Marathon bombing, and so so I went into class. They sent me a photo that they were on the finish line. It was a gorgeous day. There's a great movie made by filmmaker Peter Berg, called Patriots Day, starring Mark Wahlberg, about the Boston Marathon. That is incredibly accurate to what the city was like, and how the whole thing played out. But from my perspective, gorgeous day. I get this amazing photo of Tanya and the boys on the finish line on Boston Street, huge crowds, all the stuff I've seen on TV since. And then I went into class, and then during class, one of my there was a colleague in class who was very, very senior in the FBI, who was there to do the program with us, and he announced that there'd been a terrorist attack at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. So the first thing I did was went and text, but they shut all the mobile service, because that was being used to detonate the bomb. So there was a period of time there was no mobile reception. So I just had, I don't know, 20 minutes, maybe it was 30. I don't think it was probably as long as 30, but I mean, it felt like a day that I just thought, because I just lost my entire family, just indescribable. So that was now, long story short, they were all completely fine. They'd left the finish line about 20 minutes before the explosion, maybe a bit less, because they just got back to their apartment in Back Bay, because they were getting ready, because they were flying out that evening to go up to Canada. And when my wife heard the explosion, she said, she was like, wow, that's huge. She kind of assumed it was like a ceremonial cannon to indicate the finish of the event, or something that was kind of like, wow, that was. And then it became obvious that it wasn't that. And so thankfully, about, 20, 25 minutes later, I got through to them and found out that they were safe. But I would say that 20 minutes of complete limbo, knowing my family was there and not knowing what happened, that was the first epiphany and that was early in my time at Harvard. So that reset my thinking about what are we here for, right? I talk about the first existential crisis, so that was a moment. And then the second thing, Harry, was I'm doing this course with a whole bunch of great people. I was 39 when I was doing it. So, certainly one of the younger people in the cohort. I'd say the program was sort of, mid 40s through to late 50s was the people who were there. So I just started asking them, going back to my original point about being curious. I just started asking them, what, if you were 39, what would you tell me? I'm 39, I've got a young family, you're 51, and you've got to a really high level in your career, and you've got a much older family. If you could go back in time, what would you do differently, or what advice would you give me? And I just found I was asking a lot of really bright, kind, intelligent people those kind of questions, and I was getting some fairly similar responses, which if I get them to a couple of themes, it's number one, do not lose sight of your family while striving for your career. And some of them had immense regret over the decisions they'd made, and they were just sharing with me, don't make the mistakes I have. I really deeply regret them. And now I'm trying to play catch up with my kids, and I'm hoping to play catch up with my grandkids. You know, that's how they were. That was one kind of sort of view on it. And then the other view was like, if you've got any view that you want to do something different, like there'll be a point at which it'll be too late to leave corporate, and it's not too late yet. So if there's something you want to do, you should really think about doing it. Like, don't leave a whole lot of petrol in the tank. You know, if you want to take a swing, you know, you're still young enough that you can come back from it and, you know, or make peace with the fact that you want to be a small cog in a big wheel and just go down the path of your optimizing your corporate career. So they were the two clear themes that was coming out of all these conversations.
Right. And what was going through your mind as you were hearing those two key themes? What was really dawning on you in that moment?
Well, dawning on me was there's a lot of wisdom here, right? These people are a decade or more ahead of me. So there's a lot to be learnt from this, and already feeling unsettled about the scare with the bombing, and thinking like, you know, are we here for a bigger reason, bigger purpose? Those big kind of existential questions I was definitely kind of asking. And then I was kind of started thinking, well, I suppose how I processed it when I came back, I said, when I come back, I want to find something that I can be passionate about and put some money towards and some energy towards. I wasn't thinking new career. I was thinking, who knows, right? But at least have something. Nothing was called a side hustle back then, right? This is 2013, but it was just find a bit of a passion project, put some money into it, put some hours and energy into it. So I think that was the big takeaway. It's not as though I came back and said, okay, I'm resigning. I'm just going to go and, you know, work out what I want to do down the track. There was nothing that kind of rash. It was more, okay, on a sentiment basis, I'm going to take some deliberate steps. And sure enough, within sort of 4 or 5 months of being back home, I'd stumbled across an opportunity that ultimately led to my original investment in what is now today Alta.
Then, okay, so in that decision making, yes, it's a side hustle. Let's just use today's language, but ultimately that's what it was. Was it the side hustle just like kind of more of a passion project? You just want to make more of an impact. You want to get some cool things out there and make things happen, or was it that this thing's going to make money and this is going to be my ticket out of corporate world?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't the latter. It was maybe an optimistic hope that it could potentially do that. So I think it was more the former. Like I want to spend some money and energy invested in an idea I believe in, and hopefully if it's got legs, who knows, down the track there could be something that is then ready for me to transition across to. But I'd say that was the optimistic end of it. I don't think I started with that in mind. I was hopeful. I didn't expect that. And I just wanted to put some money to work and learn some stuff through could I build out a business concept or an idea. If I was fortunate enough, maybe I could jump across, which did end up happening, but I'd be disingenuous if I said, yeah, I knew then that was going to lead to this. No, I didn't. It was more speculative at that stage.
Yeah, I hear that. It was almost like this is your test run. And then at some stage during your test run, you realized, wait, it's not a test. This is the real thing. It's live.
Yeah.
Like we're actually live. This is happening. What were you doing at the time when what was your role as you were doing that? How did you balance both of those, as well as being a dad of reasonably young kids? They were 6, 7, 8 years old at that stage.
Yep.
how did you manage all of that? You're putting time and effort and energy into your corporate. You're putting some time, effort, energy, and a lot of thought and I guess a lot of mental space or bandwidth
Yep.
towards Wim to Warrior.
Yep.
And you were also trying to continue to be a present husband and engaged dad.
Yeah.
What happened there? How on earth did you balance it?
Well, I don't know that you do fully balance it. I'm sure there's times when I got parts of it wrong and various elements of my life, suffered. So I think you do your best. I certainly very lucky to have an incredibly supportive wife who, really did an incredible job running her own business, making a significant impact to our household finances through her business, but then also, being a great mum to the kids. So I definitely felt safe that my kids were being raised really hands-on by their mother and me, obviously, when I wasn't at work. So that definitely makes it easier to be successful when one element, somebody's picking up far more of the workload and doing a brilliant job at it. Well, that was good fortune, on my behalf. And then, I was, I kind of talked openly about my passion for the business and what I was doing with some, colleagues at Perpetual. And so maybe it was, a few smart people I was working with there. They had their own various ideas of things they also wanted to get involved in. So I don't think it was unique to want to put some money to work and have a bit of a passion project outside the company. So that was somewhat harmonious because it was so different. It's not as though I was in conflict to my main role.
Yeah.
And so
you weren't setting up a new financial planning platform or business or an investment platform or whatever, right?
No.
Just so different.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I think that I was fortunate in that I worked with good people. I worked hard and I think I was pretty good at my job. I had a great supportive wife who had built her own business and was running the house. So I think, you kind of make it all stick together. You look back at some of those years and go, wow, it was pretty rugged. Like there was some, fairly wild times that stretched everybody a lot. But, and that's ultimately what led to my decision to leave corporate altogether at the end of 2016 and say, you know what, this thing has got enough legs and I've conceived of an enterprise model that I think can be valuable. And I can see the ability to create a business that can be, ultimately listed on public markets. Again, like just that kernel of belief across those elements, that's what ultimately led me to say, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. Now, when I say I'm going to give it a shot, what I was pretty clear of in my own mind, Harry, I'm thinking, you know what, I'll give this a red hot go for 12 months. But unless we've got material traction, I'm not going to just sit on the side. Then I'll just go back to what I was doing.
Right. And how much pressure did you feel on yourself to need to make it work in those 12 months? Like did setting the 12-month deadline for you kind of like make you motivate, inspire, whatever, but somehow influence you to really give an even bigger go? Or was it just natural for you? You were just going to put the same amount of effort regardless, and you were just going for 12 months, just seeing if it would work?
Yeah, I think you by putting that time on it, you are prepared to have a bigger go. You are going like completely urgently, and you keep thinking, that first 12 months, like I didn't earn $1 from the business. I didn't earn $1 out of the business basically for the first 2 years. So I had to sustain our household off, our savings and my wife's business. So that took a high degree of conviction to go into year 2 of that. But so you definitely work more urgently. I think what you hope is that the go, no go, i.e. do I keep going after 12? You hope it's going to be more stark. But what you find in life, it's not, it's just enough to drag you to the next stage. And for me, the biggest decision was at the end of 2017 was when I had a good mate who wanted to invest in the business. And that's when I had to really think long and hard, because I thought, if I take his money, like, I can walk away from losing my money, and that's, I can make peace with that. That's my call. But as soon as my time at Perpetual, and I think who I am as a person, I'm a fiduciary. I'm very good at thinking about, shareholders and their assets and stewardship of the company. And so I'm like, if I take his money, I'm really locked in here. So that was probably my biggest point of deliberation. He's a high net worth guy and very sophisticated investor. Like, he was going in with eyes wide open and, pushing me to take the investment, say, hey, mate, if it doesn't work, like, he was putting in $100,000 up front. And he said, like, if it doesn't work, I've got a big tax deduction, so don't stress, and
Yep.
But that was the moment. So it wasn't until the very end of 2017, and I decided to take his investment. That's when I felt locked in, and I've felt locked in since.
Do you want to share what Wim to Worry is?
Yeah, well, Alta, as it is now. Yeah, what started as a program, or originally started as the name of a non-scripted TV show, which got broadcast and shown on Fox Sports back in 2015. It was that whole idea, that premise of, from the couch to the cage, take, 30, 40 ordinary people and put them through an incredible 5 months training program and get them to compete in their first amateur MMA fight. And it's actually got very little to do with producing fighters. It's got nothing to do with producing fighters in the traditional sense. What it's got to do with is getting a group of ordinary people through a very extraordinary training journey, and the amount of personal growth that comes from that. And so that's why, these days, as the business has scaled, like, one of our most famous coaches and partners, a guy called Eugene Behrman, who runs City Kickboxing in Auckland, who trains multiple UFC world champions. He's very clear that he feels that everybody on planet Earth could benefit from training for and competing in sanctioned combat sport once in their life, right? The huge growth that comes from subjecting yourself to that amount of discomfort, that amount of fear, overcoming all those things. And so the business started with an idea of, I suppose what was originally this non-scripted TV show, and pretty quickly morphed into, hang on a sec, we've got some branded IP that's resonating far more broadly than just a cohort that we take through a program. And then all of a sudden, other gyms wanted to get involved. And then we got our big break that an Irish guy who did the program here in Sydney went back to Dublin, and it landed on the desk of John Kavanagh, who's, great mate of mine these days and co-founder of the business. And so then the business morphed into, okay, we've actually got some unique brand and IP to be able to attract very different people to train in a combat sports academy and do an amazing program and kind of graduate from their program with a competitive sanctioned bout at the end of it. And the business kind of then ramped up. We signed a whole bunch of gyms and we started programs all over the world. And in my mind's eye, what was really clear from sort of end of 2016, end of 2017 was the idea that, could we really help monetize the sector by adding this layer of marketing, payments and brand to attract more mass affluent fitness consumers to train inside these academies. And so it kind of started that and proving it out with all these licenses and putting people through programs all around the world. And then the next iteration from that for me was all about, well, if this is a very vast sector, which we know it is, massive total addressable market, huge number of gyms, coaches globally, tens of billions of dollars being spent annually, people already training in martial arts. And meanwhile, you've got the UFC and professional MMA just blowing up the fan base growth. So now it's like, okay, so how can we utilize all those incredible sector tailwinds and start matching people up to train in gyms all around the world, and we'll control the payments experience and the customer onboarding and deliver these additional revenues to the gyms. And so what the business has naturally morphed into based on how I thought about sector aggregation back in 2017 is now what you see on trainalta.com, which is this marketing brand IP that wants to match people with online and in-gym training experiences all over the world. And so a good throwaway line or helpful proxy, Harry, is to say, if you think about how CrossFit aggregated training in strength and conditioning, like that became such a dominant brand with, I think at their peak, 17,000 gyms globally calling themselves a CrossFit gym or CrossFit box. Similarly, so we often say, well, Alta is CrossFit for combat sports, i.e. we want to aggregate the sector and we want to match as many customers as possible with great training experiences from coaches and gyms that already exist. And so that's who we are now, and that's what we're growing to become.
Right. And you made this comment before, which I think is, I'm still really curious about the growth of Alta in that sense and bringing people on board and all of that. But you made this comment about everyone should be in combat, like a sanctioned combat event at least once. Can you tell me more about the logic behind that? And have you competed as well?
Yeah, I have. So I competed as a kid first in judo for a bunch of years when I was training judo. And then as an adult, I've competed in amateur mixed martial arts. I can honestly say, like, one of the greatest experiences of my life, undoubtedly one of the scariest experiences, and something that was a catalyst for enormous personal growth, because I think overcoming enormous fear and discomfort, kind of leads to you feeling a lot more capable and proud and validated. So, I think one of the great, misnomers is what's the word I'm looking for? Great paradox, actually, Harry, is that training in combat sports is actually incredibly safe, and training with some of the most, physically capable people, essentially dangerous people, you're dealing with some of the most patient, well-adjusted and wonderful coaches, right? And so, I've got a firm view, and it's reflected in the fact that my three boys have been doing jiu-jitsu now on and off for over 10 years, that people can benefit enormously from subjecting themselves to something that's physically hard and teaches you endlessly. Getting better at martial arts is about, failing forward, if you like. That's what, my mate and business partner, John Kavanagh, says all the time. You fail your way towards success. As he said, he's a 3-stripe black belt, first jiu-jitsu black belt in Ireland, and under, the famous Matt Thornton, a really proud sort of lineage in his jiu-jitsu. As he said, he has no idea how many times he's tapped on his way to being, such an acclaimed coach and such an amazing, practitioner. And so I think that's the beauty of martial arts, is creates an incredibly safe and supportive environment to fail forward, John said once to me, I heard him say it on a podcast I was witness to him recording, and he said that embarrassment is the price you pay for excellence, i.e. to get really good at something, you gotta suck at it for a while and get better, and suck at it again and get better, and so on and so forth. And I think there's very few sports that give you as clear exposure mechanism around that than martial arts and combat sports. And I've seen the enormous benefits it's yielded to my boys. I know the benefits it's yielded to me. I know the incredible friendships I've made in this environment. And I know that if you're going to spend a whole lot of time training hard or getting sweaty, why not also simultaneously develop some amazing skills while you're doing it? So I think the sector has an incredibly rich offer for customers. I just don't think that it's presented in a way that it's not an easy on-ramp, right? People can be very nervous walking into even the most friendly jiu-jitsu academy, right? And they're nervous of, not knowing. They're nervous of feeling silly. They're nervous of all the, I suppose all the pageantry and ceremony around martial arts, like just feeling like a complete fish out of water. And so I think that something that we're certainly very focused on solving for Alta is making the customer on ramp to get people into amazing martial arts academies as well resolved as possible, because we believe wholeheartedly that people who train in martial arts and combat sports are the healthiest and happiest version of themselves.
They can be. I've seen some people get hyper aggressive as a result, but that's probably not as a result, right? I'll agree based on everything which of the vast majority of people I've connected with.
Yeah.
When you're just sharing what you're talking about, failing forward and enduring challenges. I had my jiu-jitsu coach on the podcast ages ago. His name's Adam Childs. He's incredible. He got his black belt under Fabio over in Brazil. So in Sao Paulo, which at the time was like the Harvard of jiu-jitsu schools.
Yeah, of course.
And he just basically points out, like, you got to be willing to go through the pain. He was talking about it in the context of jiu-jitsu physical pain. How much pain can you push through in order to find the growth and find greater strength within you? But he made the exact same metaphor towards people who are in corporate, like that night where you just decided to only get 2 hours sleep because you were working nonstop and pulling an all-nighter. Like, that's not good for your body. That's not good for your emotions.
Yeah.
Like, why would you choose to pursue that? Why would you choose to push through? It's only because you're striving towards a greater outcome. You're striving towards something which is bigger, something which is better, something more impressive, basically, and a greater version of that which is within yourself.
Great.
So was that the core part of, like, was that a core part of why you wanted people to be doing MMA? Like, when you did what was Wimp to Warrior, when you started it at the time, was it because you wanted people to gain that benefit from martial arts, or was it something else?
I mean, that was part of it. That was certainly part of it. But I also saw commercially an opportunity to disrupt a massive sector, and I saw an opportunity to put more money in the pockets of great coaches and great gyms. So as much as the people doing well out of it personally, that's attractive. But I equally saw, if I've got a great coach and more people can be introduced to that coach and their gym can do better as a result, that was what got me really excited. And then what got me also excited, I've been a really big fan of the sport, and then you see the kind of growth that the sport has experienced, and you want to tap into that, and you want to help monetize that back into this vast, gym and coach landscape. And so I definitely was very attracted to the opportunity to, profoundly transform a sector. That absolutely, from a business building standpoint, that was absolutely my primary motivation.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we've spoken quite a bit about these steps through, like, in terms of your steps in your career, and we kind of like jumped through this whole phase of starting out in, like, at Wimp to Warrior. It was kind of just you, or maybe with the business partner, you're just trying it out and just seeing how it goes.
Yep.
And then you got to a point of going, okay, I'm kind of going to go all in for at least 12 months. I'm going to give it my all.
Yeah, correct.
Did you already have a team at that point, or was it all still kind of just you?
No, we had, there was myself, my original business partner, who created the concept, the training program of Wimp to Warrior. So he came from the coaching side. I suppose I came from the business and scaling side. And then, another person originally in the business who'd also done the program, and she was very passionate about, the opportunity to help build it. She had done some work for the business before, but wanted to make sure if she was going to work for the business full time, that it was going to be stable, as the business previously wasn't stable financially. So and she was kind of prepared to do whatever needed to be done, around kind of, ops and admin and all that kind of stuff. And then my wife also helping out significantly in that first year, probably mainly because she wanted to protect our asset, right? We've put a fair bit of money into this. And so she's thinking to herself, if we're all in on this and I can help, I may as well do it. So that was kind of I suppose that was the original. And then, you had people around the business who wanted to help. And so I wouldn't call it a team per se, but you'd have people you could involve to do some casual work here and there. And like all kind of startups, it starts off so gritty, if you know what I mean. And you make goals for the next week around customers, and can we get another gym on board? Can we start another program here? What else do we need to do? Then we had great people come on board. A mate of mine I went to school with came on board and said, look, he had an outsourced CFO business. And so he was saying to me, well, look, I'll come and do it. Me and my team will do a bunch of work for you guys, and we'll do it on a sweat equity basis. And so that was a skill set and capability we didn't have. And you start to stick these different people together, Harry, and then you find a pathway to, hang on a sec, we might be actually able to kind of build something here. But if you started with a view that, okay, let me assemble my perfect team, and then we'll get in a room for a couple of months and work out exactly how this works, and then we'll take it to market, that ain't going to work, right? That's going to cost a fortune, and it's going to be over before it starts. Pardon me. So yeah, it was all about, okay, so how do we scale up, use people around us, and look, there was so much goodwill attached to what we were doing. It was an exciting business. So we were fortunate that, we had a bunch of people who said, how can I be involved? Whether it was through sweat equity or doing some casual work, and you just kind of, and again, you had, me as the principal investor, working for free for a long period of time. You just have to scrap and scale. And you occasionally hear those stories, Harry, of businesses who get, early on get vast amounts of venture capital money, and then 2 or 3 years later, it's all gone. And, I used to just shake my head and like, how can that happen? But I do think sometimes easy come, easy go. Like if they don't have to fight incredibly hard and bootstrap and scrap and do all those things, they get money and they go and do something, and then they're starting to run out of money, and the market, they can't tap the money from the market for money again. And they kind of, instead of going, well, shit, now we're to really fight for this thing, they are, well, we tried, So because we never had that, because our start was so much more gritty, I think it breeds into you just an ability to find a way. Like, just not accept failure's not an option, and you just got to find a way. And I'd say that's characterized a business that is, we've grown really successfully. We've grown our footprint globally, and we've put, thousands and thousands of people through our training programs, signed up hundreds of gyms, and we've done that all the meantime, getting through 2 years of horrible trading restrictions through COVID, and everything that happened in capital markets last year. So, and I think one of the reasons we've made it through to where we are now is because the start was so hard, and we had a lot of grit and just a mindset of we will find a way. So that's the silver lining when nothing's easy from the start, that you just find a way.
Yeah, okay. And is it just because nothing's easy from the start, or is there a way that people can develop that? Like, we're just going to find a way, because most people just give up, right? How do you develop that? If someone's listening to this, or imagine someone's a mentee coming up to you, or someone's just wanting to learn from you as a mentor, and you're like the 50-year-olds that you're at Harvard with. They're like, had that level of grit which you have, how do you just always find a way? What do you say? How do you help them?
It's an active decision, Harry. Like they have to, like how much does it mean to them? Like, are they prepared to do whatever it takes? Within the bounds of legality and other things. But do they really? I just think entrepreneurship and growing businesses, building businesses, whether it's a small business, mum and dad own corner store, all the way to, obviously something larger and more ambitious, which is clearly what we're building at Alta. There is an active decision where you say like, and it was easy for me because I took, as I built out our cap table and our investor base, it was my friends who were investing in the company, right? So, my two of the people I work with in the business early on, they didn't have networks that they could activate and bring to the table for that. That was all on me. So then I felt, well, this money is even more precious because it's my mates who are backing this company and my vision for this company. And so it wasn't hard for me to not accept any chance of failure because I just so desperately want my mates to be right, and I just take it so seriously, the stewardship of their capital. So maybe the advice could be find a trigger, find something that is bigger than you, that you're prepared to fight for harder. And if that means taking on investment from someone you love and respect and you want to deliver for, if that's going to help you fight harder, do that. Like actively seek that positive pressure that's going to help get you there. Or decide this is bigger than me. The employees we've got, the mission of the business, the scale of the opportunity, I'm just going to find a way. That is such a critical mindset thing. And in that regard, I just sort of say, don't get into doing something like this lightly. Once you commit and you're going to do it, particularly when you take on external capital and you hire staff who are reliant on their job for their family, then you are fighting for something a lot bigger than yourself.
Okay. Look, I can relate. Like if we go back to the everyone should be in competition at some stage in their life, like combat competition. Mm-hmm. It was only in my first jiu-jitsu competition, still as a white belt, that I ended up realizing that, I haven't actually been taking training that seriously.
Right.
I mean, since then I haven't been taking training that seriously at all because had another baby and there was stuff happening with the business and all that kind of stuff, right? You go on and off. But at the time, it completely changed my jiu-jitsu game. Yep. Because I started out the competition as if it was kind of like you go, start competing, and I'm like, it's like a nice roll. And then about 3 minutes into a 5-minute match, you go, wait, this isn't just the average roll. I'm supposed to dig in deeper and find something else. It changes when you realize you can have that switch. And I hear you saying, at least in this analogy, that you got to find that switch. You got to find the thing that's going to make you take it much more seriously rather than just, I can tap, whatever, but like some real consequences. If you tap, you're out. It's a knockout competition.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you do have to look, if you're a sole trader and you don't have family responsibilities and all those kinds of things, like, it is what it is. You go as hard as you can for as long as you can, then you might just say, well, I'm kind of done. But if you're in an environment where, whether it's investors or staff, other key people are really reliant on an outcome, that's why I do think it's valuable to be fighting for something that's a lot bigger than yourself. And so, that's where I would encourage people that, and look, sometimes the real beauty is in the struggle. I won't admit it at the time. Like there's been some really, really hard, scary times, scaling and growing this business. Thankfully, I've been able to look back at those really hard times with hindsight and realize I was lucky that I had that struggle. I didn't feel lucky at the time. Let me be very, very clear. But with hindsight, I've been able to unpack it and go, well, hang on a sec. If that had happened then, like I remember back to a capital raise I was doing in 2019, and I had an investor come along and they were like, actually, we really like this. We want to invest a fair bit of money into this. And yeah, I spent a fair bit of time working with them on it. It looked like it was really going to happen. And then something else in their portfolio kind of blew up a bit and they had to reallocate capital, and they said, hey, we'll come back to you in 12 months. And I'd kind of got, I'd allowed myself to get my heart set on getting that money in. But then when I look back on it 12 months later, I go, my God, I would have invested in certain areas of the business that I would have massively regretted later. So it really was a silver lining I didn't get that money at that time. Didn't feel like it. But with distance and wisdom, I was able to go, okay, that's the reason. I'm a big believer in the philosophy that everything happens for a reason. And maybe that's just a helpful way to approach life because, you know, it helps you make sense of huge disappointments and other things. But that's definitely been a helpful philosophy because I have genuinely been able to look back at the big disappointments, like even the terrifying start of COVID and gym owners all throughout our footprint globally just clearly panicking, like, hang on, am I about to lose everything I've built? Talking to those people, hearing their fear, you know, we forget now, but March, April 2020 was pretty sketchy. Like, how long is this going to go on for? What do lockdowns mean? All that kind of thing. But then there was a whole bunch of things we did in the business to simplify and fast track a bunch of our tech. And it also proved that it was very valuable that we were a payments hub because, for example, we were able to institute a uniform payments process around either refunds or stop pause. And if that money had already been passed from us to the gyms, like, good luck getting that money back at that time. So it actually proved out the enormous value of being the payments hub and being the intermediary there, because we were able to ensure a really homogenous, uniform customer experience globally. So that was again, terrible experience to go through. But then you look back and go, wow, we got some major learnings out of that. We got a lot of value out of that. So that's where I am a little bit philosophical that some of our biggest disappointments have also led to our greatest learnings. And I think that, and that's why I sometimes think, Harry, and this is just a personal view, but sometimes some businesses who get a lot quickly, raise vast amounts of capital, get amazing investors on their cap table, and then it's all gone like in record time later. And there's been, you know, a bunch of those companies in recent history, a bunch of them Australian companies in recent history. I wonder if, you know, the absence of struggle they really had at the start of their life led to it all kind of fading out pretty quickly at the end because there just wasn't that incredible grit and resilience to somehow find a way. So yeah, that's the silver lining of the start that we've had to growing it, and one of the reasons that we're still here after a pandemic and some really tough markets for the last 3 years.
I'm getting the sense here that if we're linking this back to how you define success, in terms of basically doing the best you can with the resources you have, right? Like you're getting the most out of your opportunity and your circumstance, and who you are as well. It seems like in your journey, you would never have gotten the most out of all of that, the most out of who Nick Langton is and out of your circumstances and your position, if it weren't for all the people that had nudged you along, all the people you're curious with, all the people that you asked questions from that were happy to help you out, all the people who had faith in you and put money into the business and all of it, right? You wouldn't have, it sounds like you wouldn't have had the ability to realize as much of your potential as you have.
Agreed.
If it weren't for all those people who were pushing you towards achieving it.
100%. 100%. I think anybody, the older you get, the more you the more you realize you benefit from those, relationships, friendships, networks, all those things that assist, like one of my investors, is a great mate of mine and has been very successful in his own business. He's actually one of the people I met back at Bankers Trust in 96, and he's done a remarkably well. And I'm very proud of what he's achieved, and he's been a very supportive investor of mine. And he rang up one time during the, some of the really rough months of the pandemic, and he just said to me, mate, like, if no one's going to blame you, right? It's a miracle you're still going. Like, what you're doing is inspiring, but don't worry, I don't give a shit about the money. Like, he was kind of reaching out to me saying,
You're off the hook.
Your health, your welfare, that's what's important to me. Your friendship, that's important to me. Money's money. And that, the way I processed it was, number one, it was said with such compassion, right? Like, he was ringing up to check in on me, and which I was very grateful for. And then secondly, he was saying, no one's going to blame you. Like, we actually think it's a miracle you're still going. And, but he made it clear that my, my friendship with him, our relationship as mates was far more important than any investment. Now, the irony of that, Harry, is it probably made me triple down on, like, how can I not? Like, I got to do anything I humanly can to get through this because of people like that. So, I get emotional thinking about how privileged I am to have the friendships I've got that's materialized into support of the business and support of me personally. I genuinely have moments where I go, like, I feel like one of the luckiest blokes in the world that I've got such a wonderful network. And even people who've come on as investors, I didn't know them before they were investors, who've become great friends through the journey, mentors, sounding boards. And so it kind of gets back full circle to the whole learnings piece, Harry. Like, the journey is everything. Like, the destination is going to be great, but what's being experienced and learnt on the way through, that's just so incredibly precious. And the more you invest in that trust the process piece and enjoy the journey, I think the more fulfilling, and I think that actually the better you'll do at your job and the more successful you'll be.
Yeah, I hear you. Look, I want to take a quick moment to summarize some of what you've said. Like, I could do it. We've focused mostly on your journey, so I'm not going to repeat the whole journey back to you. But there are a couple of, like, really key points which I think are super valuable for anyone listening, though. So hopefully this will trigger.
Yeah.
The first part is that success isn't just about the numbers or the achievements that you get. If you were born with someone who then just hands you $100 million, it's not a success if you get $100 million in your bank account, because you haven't really achieved your potential or fulfilled your potential anywhere near it. Yeah. And so there's this element of working really hard at what you're working on and focusing on in order to get to where you can possibly get to. And then it's not about pre-identifying what that outcome is going to be. Like, you don't know. That you were talking about trust the process. You're like, I know it's just a metaphor, whatever. But you're talking about, you got to make sure that you trust the process, you engage with it, you fall in love with whatever the outcome is. And there's this element of not knowing exactly what the outcome is. Throughout your corporate career, you probably put a lot of effort into various projects and various endeavors that you're working on, or a particular sale with a big, like a high ticket client or whatever it is. You might put a lot of effort into those and then not get the outcome, or get a different outcome to what you expected.
Yep.
But if you've given it your all, then just like you would in a martial arts combat, if you've given it your all, then you at least know that you've done the best you possibly can. This is one of those things that you're trying to instill in your boys. I mean, it's a very powerful aspect as well, that it's surround yourself with incredible people. Yeah. You've spoken about all the mentors and the like that you've had, but you also mentioned quite a few times about your wife. She's not just going, okay, yeah, cool, she's responsible for that stuff, I'm just going to go off and do this. You actually worked as a team with everything which you did. I'm guessing you also helped with the math tutoring company as well.
I didn't.
No, you didn't.
I didn't.
There you go.
I did
There you
nothing.
go. You've been the lucky one then. And making sure that you got the right people around you, not just the people with money, and not just the time as soon as possible, because that doesn't always work for you either.
No.
You want to have the right people around, the type of
Yep.
people who invest a whole lot of money and then call you up going, I care more about you than I care about the money that I've given into the business. And ironically, it's because of how responsible you feel towards the money that other people have given you, it determines, or basically is influenced, how effective you've been or how successful you've been with managing the resources that others have trusted in you.
Yeah.
And so there have been a few times in your life where you've had to really stop and reflect. The Boston Marathon running, the marathon, the bombing is one of those times.
Yep.
Asking people around you for their thoughts is another one of those times. Deciding to go ahead for another 12 months after you've already been out of corporate for 12 months.
That was a big moment, because it was all based on, do I accept this investment from a great mate? And like, I knew he could afford it. It wasn't about, oh shit, this is a really bad asset allocation decision. He's a really sophisticated guy, but it was more the moment where, okay, like, this is bigger than me just deciding to put in more of my own money. This is where now I've got a responsibility that exceeds that. And that's just how I operate as a fiduciary. And so, that was another very big, that was really the moment where I'm like, okay, I'm in this up to my eyeballs now.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure there have been a few points throughout time and throughout history that have made you feel somewhat similar in terms of additional raisings that you've had, or additional people you've had involved, or the CFO is like, I'll just do it for sweat equity for them. He's putting in all of his time and energy for free. All those things that contributed towards it. Now to get to the point of hopefully listing on NASDAQ. And I mean, where to from here? Like, what's next that is going to be in your life? I'm guessing you continue to grow Alta, but there are other projects that you're planning. Are there when do you choose for your next adventure to start?
Well, it's really clear for me, Harry. I've got a company that I'm very focused on listing in the US later this year, and there's a huge amount of work to be done between now and then to successfully do that. And that will successfully listing the business, that will represent closing one chapter and starting a next. That will be very stark. That I'll be able to, this is how I think about it myself, I'll be able to look at everybody who put money into the company and backed me and knew that I would keep going when other people quit, walked away, said it was all too hard. They knew that I would keep going. I'll be able to look at them and just know that their faith and their support was well-founded. I think that'll be a very proud moment for me. It's about, that'll be where I can say, okay, that now the hard work, the next phase of hard work starts when you're a listed company. And obviously I've worked inside listed companies and I know that, but that'll close a chapter and then the new chapter starts immediately. And that is kind of, blue sky growth. I'll be spending a lot more time overseas. There's some wonderful networks to cultivate as we grow the business. But I've got my twins doing their HSC next year. So that's a big focus of mine to, ensure that they, finish school and set themselves up for the next phase, whatever they choose to do work or study wise. Again, getting back to, did they squeeze the most out of their ability and potential? So that'll be a big theme, for next year and beyond. And then, look, I think for me, I'm not sure what the next adventure is, but if I go back to a theme that you picked up on, Harry, I haven't always been able to precisely articulate, like, I actually never felt it was entirely helpful to say, this is exactly what I want to be doing in 3 years, 5 years, whatever, right? What I think is helpful is identifying, well, what is the trajectory of my life, right? What is the positive and how it manifests precisely in terms of my job title, what I'm earning. that will be what it will be. But what is the trajectory of where I'm heading? And so similarly, I'll be focused, well, what's the trajectory and what's this next phase of my life look like? You know, as my boys go through the end of their school journeys and into the start of, you know, study and emerging careers or building their own businesses, however they kind of choose to go. I want to be in a position where I've got more time to give to that, because there hasn't been balance. There can't be balance when you're building a company. Like, that's just, I've made peace with that. I don't feel any guilt about that. But the next phase, I really hope will afford me that, you know, that more flexibility and time. So that's how I think about it.
I've got a final question for you, which is, let's just imagine that after you walk out of here, you end up getting hit by a bus or something. You lose your words and your ability to communicate the rest of your life, and you can't do anything else. And your boys are listening to this. They've heard this whole message. They've listened to the podcast. They're reflecting on Dad and what life's meant. What's the wisdom, like really condensed, what's the wisdom that you really want to share with them, that they hear, that they can adopt in their life and that they can apply?
I mean, I genuinely believe that true happiness and contentment comes from really pushing yourself and trying as hard as you can across all fields of your life. Career, relationships, academia, whatever. I think the source of happiness that then cascades into and manifests as a great life, if there's one guiding force, if you can genuinely say, I've done everything possible in those spheres, I haven't wasted time, I haven't procrastinated, I haven't, you know, been lazy or not applied myself or whatever. I think if you can just understand that your greatest joy and self-satisfaction and probably peace, because I think that's the ultimate embodiment of, you know, feeling peaceful about, what is, you know, whatever will be, but I'm peaceful at everything I've done that's led up to that. So it's not incredibly eloquent, but I'm conscious. I do talk to them about this a lot, which is really just, you know, that is what will lead to contentment and profound happiness, to give your very best in every element of your life. That is the ultimate safeguard against regret. And regret that's the thing I think everybody should try and avoid. Like that's cancerous, and that erodes so many good things in your life if you have regret. Well, the greatest way to avoid regret is to know you've done your very best. Whether you've achieved or not, you can peacefully say, hey, I tried my hardest. I made it or I didn't make it, but I don't blame myself. I don't carry any self-loathing that, I let myself down.
That's a perfect note to end it on. Thank you, Nick.
Terrific. Thank you, Harry.
So I hope you received a whole lot of value from engaging in that conversation. What were the key takeaways for you? What can you schedule in your life right now to make sure that the time you just invested into listening to this exceptional conversation with this amazing mentor and this amazing individual is time that wasn't misused, but was time that you've allocated properly to enhancing your life and improving it? Whatever it is, schedule it now, practice it now. Be the successful person you're meant to be. Live with purpose.